Hello, welcome to another episode of Hidden Treasures with the Hopkinton Historical Society. I'm your host, Jim Cousins, but I am not the important one here. We have members of the Hopkinton Historical Society who come onto the show and share some of the fantastic things that they have in their archives. With me today, sitting in for John Palmer, is Ann Mattina, who is the Vice President of the Historical Society. Ann, welcome to the show.
Thanks so much, Jim. I'm really excited to be here today and share these items with you.
Me too. So I know you brought two treasures from there. Let's hear all about them.
Okay. Well, the first one is a painted, it's Painting on Velvet by Olive Jones Howe. Olive Jones was born in 1764 here in Hopkinton, and she died in 1843. We don't have a date on this particular piece, although it says on the back 1825 with a question mark. So we're assuming it was around that time. Olive Jones painted this on velvet, put it in a frame with glass, and what it was actually used for, it wasn't just decorative. According to what's written on the back, it was used to protect your face when you were sitting in front of an open fireplace.
Okay.
So it had a use, which is very interesting, and it's also very interesting that we still have it, over 100 years later, about 100 years since it was made. I'll tell you a little bit about Olive Jones. She was the daughter of John Jones and Mary Mellon, and she was married to the Reverend Nathaniel Howe. Nathaniel Howe was the second minister of Hopkinton. So he was someone very influential in the community. And as I was researching about Olive, I found some very interesting things about her as well. Nathaniel Howe is the man who wrote the Century Sermon, which some of your viewers may know about, but the Century Sermon was delivered by him in I think it was the 1840s, I believe. And at that time, it became world famous, believe it or not. And it's still something you can find copies of just about in every archive in Massachusetts as well as other places, and we certainly have copies of it at the Historical Society. The reason why it became so famous, this is kind of funny, was because he was complaining in his very wonderful sermon observing the 100 years of, I think it was the 100 years of the Congregational Church he was talking about here in Hopkinton. As I said, he was the second minister. Nathaniel came here as minister and accepted a salary of 40 pounds a year from the Hopkinton community. 40 pounds a year may sound like we were not really sure how to take it, given our comparison between now and the late 1700s, early 1800s. However, the thing is it wasn't nearly enough to raise a family on. And try as he might, he could not get the congregation to give him a raise. And he regularly complained about it. For extra money, he cut wood, he farmed, he did odd jobs around town. And so in his famous second, this sermon, on this Century Sermon, he actually took his parishioners to task for not paying him enough money. And it became kind of a joke. People really enjoyed it. They thought it was kind of funny that this very famous minister would be, having to kind of beg through his sermon for more money for he and his family. Despite that, he and his wife Olive were known as very, very generous people. And Olive Jones was known to be someone who, if someone were sick in your family, she would be there immediately with a meal to help out with the children, even though she had a few children of her own. She still, at the same time, took care of others in the parish. She was also known for her wit and her sense of humor as well. And it kind of sounds like she would need one being married to Nathaniel. I think that's probably the case. She had two children. Olive had two children. The first one was Appleton Howe, and Appleton Howe was born in 1792, and the other was Lucy Ann Howe. Lucy Ann Howe is married John Augustus Phipps. Not Phipps, Fitch. I knew I was going to do that. Fitch, John Augustus Fitch. John Augustus Fitch was a very famous, very well-known person in our community. The Fitch family, we still, to the 21st century, are very aware of their impact on the family, on the community. Mm-hmm. John Augustus owned a home on Ash Street. He was raised on Ash Street as well. And he and Olive had, he and Lucy had several children. One of his daughters became the famous writer, Lucy Fitch Howe. I'm going to get that right.
Yes.
I'm trying to get that right. I might have gotten that completely confused. Anyway, Lucy was the author of a whole series of books in the late 19th century. So she was pretty famous. Appleton Howe, her father, was he left Hopkinton when he was a young man to find his fortune in the Midwest. However, he was not able to do so. He lost his money, and he returned to Hopkinton with his family for a period of time. And then his children, as I said, went on to the grandchildren of John Augustus and Lucy Ann Howe. They became, they were much more settled than Appleton Howe. Appleton Howe, however, came back to Hopkinton as an older man. He served in the Civil War. He was injured. And when he retired, he came back to Hopkinton, and he lived for a period of time in the Chelsea Soldier Home, which is where he died. And he was a lieutenant in the Army. And the reason why I know this about Appleton Howe Fitch is I got a call one day from Mike Whalen, who is, as you know, our veterans agent here in town. Yep. And Mike takes care of a lot of he takes care of all the cemeteries in town, making sure the appropriate graves are flagged on Memorial Day and Veterans Day. And he was asking about Appleton Howe's headstone, Appleton Howe Fitch's headstone. And he said, it's lying on the ground, and it's been lying here for a long time, and I want to pick it back up and give it a base. I just want to make sure I'm putting it in the right plot. Was he the son of John Augustus? And I said, yes, absolutely, that was him. And I said, Mike, you know he was a veteran. And he did not know that. Evidently, he had not been marked as a veteran. And I think it's because he enlisted in Illinois. Okay. He did die in the Chelsea Soldiers Home, but it was one of those facts that got lost. And so there wasn't a Civil War marker on the grave either. Okay. And I'm happy to report that Mike has arranged for a Civil War marker to come. He made the stone stand upright, and he's getting a Civil War marker for it as well. Nice. So Olive Jones Howe, the woman, the artist behind this fireplace screen, her legacy lives on well into our time period. We're still talking about her children and her grandchildren and great-grandchildren. So I thought it was nice to be able to show the folks a piece of her work. This comes to us from the Fitch collection, which was donated by Jeremy Wyant to the Hopkinton Historical Society a few years ago. And it's one of many artifacts we have from the home. So that's
very fascinating.
Yes.
Yeah. And I like the fact that, that had a real utilitarian purpose.
Yes.
We don't do that anymore. We don't have those. And it makes me wonder, was it cold? So they had like a roaring fire and had to get close, but they didn't want to get their fit. So kind of like how that's different. There must have been a stand with, I would think, too.
I would think.
Eventually.
I would think. And the other thing, too, is fireplaces at that time period, when you think 1825, they were still almost as high as the wall.
Oh.
They weren't as, the short kind of decorative ones we're familiar with now. They were tall.
Like a serious fireplace.
A serious fireplace. Well, if you think that's probably the only source of heat in the house, they would have it roaring.
Yes.
Absolutely.
Right.
So,
very cool.
yes, it
now,
is.
Interesting. Like, how do you know that that's what it was? Are there notes that
It actually says it on the back.
Oh, okay.
It says it on the back, and again, I'm not sure who wrote it, but it is handwritten on the back and from one of the Wyants. And I think it may be Jeremy's grandmother, who was a Fitch herself.
Okay. Wow. And she was an English person when she was born. Because it was before, it was before 1776.
Right.
And then she was an American. She was like one of the original Americans.
That's right.
Well,
That's
fascinating.
right. It
All
is.
right. Well, thank you for sharing that.
You're welcome.
Let's talk about the next thing.
Well, the next thing also is of use, which is kind of interesting. This is a sampler, which you probably have seen many times through the years. And this sampler was donated to the Historical Society just a few months ago by David and Carol Antos of Boston. And they reached out to us. They had purchased a lot at the I can't think of Spinner's auction house. Skinner's, not Spinner's. Skinner's auction house. About 35 years ago, they said. And in that lot, they bought it for another sampler. The other sampler was done by a Sophia Sophia Phipps. And they thought that Mary Holmes Phipps was related to her.
Okay.
However, we can't figure out where Sophia came from. We've been looking through her family tree trying to figure this out. But this Mary H. Phipps was Mary Holmes Fitch, and they asked if we would like to have it for the society. And I said, how fast can you bring it out here? Okay. So she was born in 1826 in Hopkinton. Okay. Her parents were Nathan and Polly Adams Phipps. It's very common, as you can probably tell just when I was talking about the Fitch family, they reuse names and they oftentimes use the mother's maiden name for middle names, and that gets passed down over and over again through the generations. Okay. Holmes, which is her middle name, is actually her grandmother's maiden name. Oh. So Polly Adams' mother's maiden name was Holmes. So Nathan and Polly had, I should have counted them first. I think there's 10 children, including Mary. And the purpose behind using a sampler, what young girls did with samplers was they learned their stitches for sewing. This was actually considered a practice for learning to sew at a later date. Sewing for your family. Mm-hmm. So young girls would learn all these different stitches, and you can actually see here where it appears that Mary was practicing. So for example, a lot of it is in blue thread, and again, it's not unusual to have the change in the color thread because she may have just run out of blue and decided to go with black. Yeah. But over here you can see there's another A after the Z. So she must have been practicing a little bit. And then over here as well, you can see a few more things. So what we have here is a list of her siblings and when they were born. So the first one is Augustus Phipps, and he was born in 1804. Susanna, Emily, who she refers to as Emmy, okay, and then Nathan A. Phipps, who was Nathan Augustus, Sarah, Sylvester, Daniel, Benjamin, and I believe Sylvester's middle name was Chamberlain. One of the brothers' middle names was Chamberlain. So again, you can tell that's another name in town.
Yep.
The Chamberlain Street is named for the Chamberlain family. So that's another Hopkinton connection in there. And of course, Susanna married a Claflin. So again, you know, lots of marriages between families here, big families in town.
Yep.
Now over here,
I was
the
gonna ask
LWP is her brother Luther Williams Phipps.
Okay.
And then we have Mary H. Phipps with her December 17th, 1826. And then we have at the end, oh, this is it. This is Ambrose Chamberlain Phipps.
Okay.
Those are the three that were born. And truthfully, I think Nathan may have been married twice.
Okay.
Because if you look at this, Polly Adams would have been having children from 1804 to 1828. That would be, even in the 19th century, even in times gone by, that's a very long time for a woman to keep having babies and having them live. You know, it's not unusual. I mean, there's a lot of, as we know, stillbirths and infants who die very early and on and everything. So there are some places that list Mary's mother. We have it as Polly Adams. There are other people who have it a totally different first name. So competing family trees on Ancestry.com. So I'd like to find out, if I can, if her father Nathan was married twice.
Okay.
So it's a good possibility these older siblings are half siblings.
Yeah.
But, you know. Anyway, Mary was born in 1826, and she was married for the first time in 1851. So she was only 15 when she got married the first time. She married a man by the name of Lambert Whitney. He was from Westboro.
Okay.
And he died very soon after. And she got married again in 1857 to a man by the name of John E. Hastings, also from Westboro. Now, just a couple of more notes about their siblings, then we'll go back to Mary. Augustus Phipps, her oldest brother, he was married and had a child by the name of Emily Adelaide in 1838. So when Mary was 12 years old, she had a niece born named Emily Adelaide Phipps. Emily Adelaide died when she was 13. It was right around the time that Mary got married for the first time. Her second daughter's name is Emily Adelaide Hastings. So she named her after her recently deceased niece.
Okay.
The name Emily Adelaide Hastings probably doesn't mean as much to Hopkinton folks as it would to Westboro folks, but it's the E.A. Hastings for whom the grammar school in Westboro is named. She was a teacher in Westboro for over 40 years. Never got married, and after her death, when a grammar school was built, it was built and they named it in her honor. And her sister, Mary, was also a school teacher in Westboro, single. They never had children. So, but I don't know if there's something more about Mary and her life we can find out. But Emily Adelaide is someone that we definitely still know a lot about, especially in Westboro. I checked out a lot of things in Westboro about her. I wanted to see if I could find out more about Mary Holmes, the mother who made this sampler for us. But again, at that time, you know, there's not a lot of records of women She passed in 1903, so she was, for that time period, very old. And there was a nice obituary about her. But it didn't really give much more than genealogical facts. That's about all. And it made note of the fact that she was one of the oldest citizens in town.
Right.
The other thing is we don't have a date on when this was done. The folks who gave it to us, the Antos family, who gave it to us, thought it might be from the 1860s. However, I think it's a little earlier than that because of two things. One is this. Mary also had a brother named David. David Phipps was born right around the same time as she was, in the 20s, late 20s, and died in 1833.
Okay.
And David's not on this list. Neither are his initials.
Right.
So it's obviously after 1833, which makes sense because she would have only been 7 at the time. However, it's before she got married in 1851. So, because it's still wrought by Mary H. Phipps, Mary Holmes Phipps.
Right.
So again, sometime I would say in the late 1840s, this was probably done. Okay. She probably did it as a teenager, as she was getting ready to get married. It was one of the things that young girls would do to learn how to sew, how to do their stitches.
Yeah.
And then the other thing is we're not really sure what the red is. It is thread, it's stitching. So was there something else there? Was there another design? I think this was really a work in progress. It was a practice, although it's beautiful. It's absolutely beautiful, and it's perfect. All the letters are perfect, and you can read it as clear as day.
Right.
But I think this was something that she practiced on. Right. And this supposedly is the original frame, and I think this is tiger maple.
Oh, yes, I think so too.
Yeah.
Now, do you think, was it typical that they would frame these back then?
Yes, I think it depends. If this one, in the condition that it's in, might not have been framed right then when she was a young girl. But somebody probably found it along the way and framed it. I think that people recognized later that these were important keepsakes. I think they realized that, especially with the genealogy piece of it. And it's 100% accurate.
100%. You know what I find fascinating about it? So you can see where she ran out of the blue and went to the black thread. Right. And she hadn't put the birth dates in until she ran out of blue. Right. And it makes you wonder, was she planning on just putting rows of names and then later on decided to put in the birth dates, and that's why she didn't have 2 columns. Right. And when you start doing that, all of a sudden it's so human. Right. It's like that's what we would do nowadays. Sure. We're going to change what we're doing. Right.
And then also to add on the last 3.
Yep.
With just the initials. Yeah. So maybe I don't know. Maybe she did do it. Who knows? Later, I'm not 100% sure about that. But I do think it's a really interesting piece, and I'm so happy that we have it, that it's at the Historical Society, and people can come and see it anytime they would like. And if people do know more about this, about maybe not the specific piece, but about samplers in general, we'd love to hear from someone. If there's other ways to figure out a date on it, that would be really helpful as well.
All right, Ann, thank you so much for bringing these treasures in. Before we wrap up the show, I know there's a couple other things you wanted to share with us.
Yes, a couple of things that are going on right now. We're having a little contest on Hop News, which is tell us the origin of street names here in Hopkinton. We've started to put together a list of all the streets in Hopkinton who we know were named for particular people, such as Chamberlain Street and et cetera, and where the name came from. Grove Street was named for a grove that was located on the west side of the street. Anyway, what we're asking people to do is just go online and read the story on Hop News and then comment underneath. And if you know, have any history, any understanding of where different street names in town came from, we'd love you to share it with us. And there are prizes involved. So the person who gives us the most names accurately as we can determine, gets a year's free membership in the Historical Society. Second place are two books by John Palmer, and one of them is The Story of Miss Duffy, and the other John co-wrote with Gail Clifford on the different monuments on the Common and their history and background. So, as I said in the article, this will surely make you the #1 person at any Hopkinton trivia party you might attend.
Right.
There is also a super duper prize, which Peter Thomas, the editor of Hop News, has not announced what the prize actually is. But no one seems to know why or how Hayden Row came to be called Hayden Row. We can't find any families named Hayden on Hayden Row. We can find Hayden Row way back, but nobody named Hayden. So if anyone has the history of Hayden Row, we would really like that. And secondly, we're having an author on June 6th. It's a Tuesday night. Her name is Elena Palladino, and her book is a really interesting book. It's called Drowned by the Quabbin. And it's the history of the towns that went underwater when the Quabbin Reservoir was made by the city of Boston. And this should be interesting to folks in town, particularly now that it's likely that we're going to be part of that Metropolitan Water Resource Authority, which runs the Quabbin now. But Elena's got a really interesting book, and so we're excited to have her come 7 o'clock, June 6th at 168 Hayden Row.
Wow, that's really exciting stuff.
Yeah.
All right, well, thanks so much for sharing that. And thank you for being here and watching this episode of Hidden Treasures. I invite you back next time where they'll bring some more treasures in for us to discuss and delve into the history of Hopkinton. Or if you can't wait, please feel free to stop by the Historical Society and see everything that they got. You'll be amazed. Take care. See you next time.